Hi, folks. Welcome to topic 6, which is all about transport systems in animals. This is part of Unit 2 of the National 5 biology course. So, in mammals, the blood contains three main things that we're going to learn about, which are the plasma, that's like the liquid part of the blood, the red blood cells, which transport our oxygen, and the white blood cells, which form part of our immune system and help to defend the body against pathogens. Now, the blood is useful because it has all these functions. It's able to help us in a number of ways. And it's really useful because it transports things like nutrients, oxygen, carbon dioxide around our body, both to and from lungs, to and from the small intestine, to and from the cells. Okay, so anything that needs to be transported to our cells is usually transported via the blood. So you need to know what the blood contains and what it transports for your exam. Okay, they're the main things that you need to know there. Within our blood, we said we've got our red blood cells. Now, our red blood cells play a vital role in a number of processes, but especially in one that we learned about in Unit 1, which is aerobic respiration. Now, we know that aerobic respiration is reliant on oxygen being present in cells. How does the oxygen get to the cells? It's transported by the red blood cells, okay? So red blood cells are super important. Now, they are able to carry out this special function of delivering oxygen to our cells by being specialized, okay? And by specialized, I mean they've got particular structures which allow them to do their function particularly well. The first one is they are biconcave in terms of their shape, okay? You can see from this image here, you can see that sort of indented concave shape that the red blood cell has, and it's biconcave because it has that on both sides, okay? They have no nucleus, and we'll talk about why in a second. And they contain a ferrous substance called hemoglobin. Okay. And hemoglobin plays an important role because it's the hemoglobin that binds to the oxygen and holds it in place as the red blood cell is being circulated around our body. Why are all of these specializations good? Well, what they allow us to do is to transport the oxygen efficiently in the form of something called oxyhemoglobin. Okay, so the biconcave shape gives the red blood cell a larger surface area. If you have a larger surface area, you can carry more oxygen. The red blood cell has no nucleus. Why is that useful? Because again, it gives the red blood cell a larger surface area, which means you can carry more oxygen. And finally, the hemoglobin, that is the part that binds to the oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. And we can see that little word equation at the bottom there. Oxygen plus hemoglobin gives us oxyhemoglobin. Okay, and you do need to remember that one. So what's the purpose of red blood cells? To transport oxygen. How does it do it efficiently? It's biconcave in shape, it has no nucleus, and it has hemoglobin, which binds with the oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. Now, the white blood cells are also very important within our blood. Their job is to destroy pathogens. Now, what are pathogens? Well, pathogens are disease causing microorganisms. Okay, they cause disease and they're microorganisms. And we know that microorganisms include things like bacterium, viruses, and fungi. In fact, scientists have often said they've misclassified me as a human because I am such a fungi. But anyway, let's move on from the bad dad jokes. So let's have a look at what these actually look like in reality. So if I click on this wee video here, we'll see some of the different microorganisms, some of the different pathogens that could potentially invade our body here in blue. Okay, and there's a wide variety. Those viruses, fungi, and bacteria are numerous. There are so many different species and types, and in terms of the numbers of each type, it's mind-boggling to even imagine how many there are. Okay, so those pathogens are constantly invading animals' bodies and trying to infect them. So what can we do about it? How can we stop them? Well, we have these things here, these little white things in this bottom video, and these white blood cells circulate around our body looking out for pathogens. And when they discover pathogens, they have a way that they can respond to destroy them. Okay, so white blood cells, part of the immune system, and are involved in destroying pathogens. But how do they destroy pathogens? Well, let's have a look right now. So there are two main types of white blood cells involved. We've got our phagocytes and we've got our lymphocytes. Now, don't worry about those names. They'll take a wee bit of getting used to before you start using them comfortably. But phagocytes are really interesting because they carry out a process which is known as phagocytosis. And we can see that in the top image here, okay? We can see a phagocyte just moving around there, engulfing those pathogens, okay? It engulfs the pathogens, and then inside it, it's got these digestive enzymes which break down and destroy those pathogens, okay? So let's see that phagocyte in action again. We can see it there going engulfing all of these pathogens and then digesting them once they have engulfed them inside them. And that process is called phagocytosis, okay? That process of digestion is phagocytosis, okay? It's where it engulfs and digests the pathogens. You do need to remember those terms. And I know it's tricky because they all sound quite similar, but just spend a bit of time memorizing them, making sure you know the difference between your phagocytes and your phagocytosis and your lymphocytes and so on. And speaking of lymphocytes are remarkable because if we look at this middle video here, we can see a lymphocyte and it's releasing these Y-shaped molecules, okay? Those Y-shaped molecules are known as antibodies, okay? They are antibodies. So lymphocytes produce antibodies, and those antibodies then destroy pathogens. How do we know they destroy pathogens? Well, if we look at this bottom video here, we can see a lymphocyte. It releases the antibodies, those Y-shaped red things. They bind to the pathogen, and then they destroy the pathogen. Okay, we can see that happening in that video there. So lymphocyte produces antibodies. Those antibodies then bind to our pathogen here, and then they destroy that particular pathogen. Okay. Now, the thing that's interesting about it is each antibody, each of these Y-shaped proteins is specific to a particular pathogen. And that's very similar to a lot of the other concepts we've learned about in biology, like with hormones and enzymes, because an antibody is a protein as well. You know, antibodies, hormones, enzymes, remember, share from Unit 1, they are all proteins. And therefore, they all have these specific arrangements, these complementary arrangements with the molecules that they bind to. In this case, an antibody binds to the pathogen, so it's specific to that particular pathogen. So, for example, if you get sick with the cold, then your body will produce antibodies that are specific to the cold. If you then get the flu 2 weeks later, your body will then produce different antibodies, which are this time specific to the flu. And if then you're really unlucky and you get COVID the next month, then your body again would have to produce antibodies that are specific to the COVID only. Okay, so it's important you remember that antibodies are specific to a particular pathogen. Okay, so let's move on to the heart and the circulatory system. So the heart is what pumps the blood around the body. That's its function, is to contract its muscles and pump blood around our body so that we can deliver the oxygen and the nutrients and so on to our cells via the blood. But the heart is a really important organ within our body, and we need to know a little bit more about it. Now, the heart has 4 chambers. We've got our right atrium, which we can see here. We've got our left atrium, which we can see over here. We've got our right ventricle, which we can see over here. And we've got our left ventricle, which we can see over here. Now, what's odd about it is if you're looking at it just now, you're probably thinking, Mr. White, the right's in the left and the left's in the right. That's okay. That's how we look at the heart, okay? So the way to remember the sides is to remember it's the opposite of what you think. The right is on the left and the left is on the right. Now, how do we remember which chamber is which? Well, right and left, hopefully, is straightforward. We just think the opposite. But in terms of which these chambers, so there's one chamber here and there's one chamber here on both sides, one at the top, one at the bottom. The way I remember it is this. I remember that A comes before V in the alphabet. And because blood enters the atrium first, before it then goes into the ventricle next, I remember A before V, so this one is going to be that one. Atrium is going to be first before ventricle. And the other way I remember it is this. If I was to get my pen and draw the outline of that, I could do an A, draw an outline there, could also do an A. If I drew the outline of this chamber down here and back up, that's a bit like a V. And again, down here and back up, it's a bit like a V. Okay, it's a bit of a silly way to remember it, but it's one of the ways that I remember it in my head. Okay, that chamber looks a little bit like an A, a smaller A, and that one looks like a much bigger V. And also remember the word atrium is smaller than the word ventricle. So therefore, the atrium is the smaller of the 2 chambers. Okay, now, however you decide to remember it for your exam, it's important that you do remember them because you're often asked to identify chambers in the exam. Now, the other thing that's important to remember is the heart also has 4 valves, okay? So we can see a valve here, okay, these things here. We can see a valve there, another valve here, and a final valve here, okay? And those 4 valves are important because they open and close and help to control the blood flow through the heart. You don't need to know much more about it at National 5, but if you go on to do higher human biology, you'll learn a bit more about the heart structure and how these valves work. Okay, so key things to remember: that we've got the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle, and the left ventricle. Now, why is it important that we remember these? Well, we need to understand which chambers the blood is going into when it's going into the heart. Okay, it always goes into the atrium first, atrium A before V, so it enters the atrium first, and then it leaves via these vessels which come out of the ventricle. Okay, so this right atrium here is receiving blood from the body. Okay, which means this atrium over here must be receiving blood from the lungs. Okay, that's the 2 places that our blood goes to and from: the body and the lungs. If the blood's come from the body in this one, and it goes into the right atrium, then into the right ventricle, when it leaves the right ventricle, it's going to go back towards the lungs. Now, why is that? Because it needs to go and get some oxygen, which means that this blood vessel here, blood enters through the left atrium from the lungs into the left ventricle. This one here is going to go to the body. Okay, so we can see that there. Okay, so the heart has also 5 associated blood vessels. We have the aorta, which you can see up here. We have the vena cava, which you can see over here. We have the pulmonary artery, which we can see up here. And we have the pulmonary vein, which you can see over here. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about the coronary arteries in a minute, but we'll leave that for now. Now, the way to remember your blood vessels is this: arteries go away. So remember A. If you can remember AA, artery away, you'll remember which direction the blood's going in, okay? So this is aorta is an artery. We can see we've put it in red here, okay? And it looks a little bit like the word artery, doesn't it? Aorta as well. So that means the blood is going away from the heart. We've got another artery over here, the pulmonary artery. This time, it's going away from the heart as well. Okay? So the arteries take blood away from the heart. The veins take blood into the heart. Okay, so the vena cava is a vein. Why? How do we know that's a vein? Well, vena is a bit like vein. And we've got the pulmonary vein over here, and that's obvious, that one is a vein. Now, how do we remember which direction the vein goes? Well, the vein, the word vein, V-E-I-N, has got in as part of it. Vein in, okay? So remember, AA, artery away, vein in. So blood goes into the heart via the veins. Blood goes away from the heart via the arteries, okay? And that's the 4 that you need to know about for your exam. Now, another little tip is this: if you remember that the word pulmonary is associated with the lungs, that will remind you where that blood vessel is going to. So the pulmonary artery is going away from the heart because it's an artery, and it's going to the lungs because it's pulmonary. Similarly, the pulmonary vein, that's coming from the lungs, pulmonary, and it's going in to the heart. Okay, there's no such clues like that for aorta and vena cava, but aorta looks a bit like artery, and vena cava is a bit like vein. So hopefully that'll again remind you which one goes where on the diagram. Now, the last blood vessel that we need to know about is the coronary artery. Now, why is that important? Well, the coronary arteries, basically the blood vessel that's leaving here, the aorta, will come all the way around here, and then it will branch off. And there'll be little blood vessels like that that will branch off there, and then in there, and then in here, and so on. And what the coronary arteries do is they supply blood to the heart muscle itself, okay? The heart itself is a muscle, so it needs blood, so it supplies oxygen and glucose for aerobic respiration, right? So therefore, it needs its own blood supply. How does it get it? Well, it's got these coronary arteries, okay? So if you're asked about the coronary arteries, they're the blood vessels which supply the heart itself with blood, okay? And then the last wee thing just to mention, and it's the reason why I've put these names in colour, is to talk about the terms oxygenated and deoxygenated. Now, if the blood has oxygen in it, we call it oxygenated. And if it doesn't have if it doesn't have oxygen in it, we call it deoxygenated. Okay, so red generally represents oxygenated and blue generally represents deoxygenated. So you can see which blood vessels have oxygen in them, i.e. the one that's just come back from the lungs and the one going to the body. And you can see the ones which don't have oxygen in them, i.e. the one coming back from the body and the one going to the lungs. And hopefully that makes sense why they do or they don't have oxygen in them, because obviously the lungs are where oxygen is gathered by our blood. Now, the other thing that we need to know about the heart is we need to know about the pathway of blood as it goes through the heart. and through our blood vessels. So the pathway of oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood is shown in this diagram here. And again, I've used red and blue to represent oxygenated and deoxygenated. And what you need to do is you need to know this sequence, okay? You need to be able to memorize and name this sequence. Now, often in the exam, what they do is they'll miss a few of these out and they'll ask you to fill in the gaps, essentially, okay? Most of them make sense. So, for example, we see the lungs here. Now, the blood going into the lungs is deoxygenated, it's blue, but the blood leaving the lungs is oxygenated, it's red. And that makes sense because we're picking up oxygen at the lungs. Similarly, down here with the body cells, we can see that it's rich in oxygen going in to the body cells, but then it's going to be lower in oxygen when it leaves. And that makes sense because our body cells are using up all that oxygen. And what we need to remember is we need to remember the order of the vessels and the chambers as blood passes along this sequence. So when it leaves the body, it goes via the vena cava. That's the blood vessel that goes into the heart, vein into. It goes into the right atrium. We go into the atrium first before the ventricle because the atrium, A, comes before V. Then it goes into the right ventricle. And then it leaves to go to the pulmonary artery, artery away, pulmonary to lungs, okay? Then the lungs take the blood back to the heart via the vein, pulmonary lungs, vein into the heart. Then it enters the atrium, the left atrium, atrium before ventricle, A before V. Okay, so left atrium, left ventricle. And then it leaves the heart to go to the body via the aorta, which is full of oxygenated blood to deliver to our cells. Now, the last thing you need to know about in this topic is all about the 3 different types of blood vessels that we have circulating that blood around our body. The 2 main ones that we're going to look at in this slide are arteries and veins. And you can see an image here, a very rudimentary image of both of them there, okay? It's very simplistic, those images, but that's just to keep things simplified and teach you the stuff that you have to know at this stage. So arteries have thick muscular walls, okay? And we can see that there, okay? We can see that thick and muscular wall in the artery there with a narrow central channel, okay? And again, we can see the central channel here in this particular artery. And we can see it's not particularly wide compared to the vein. And it carries blood under high pressure, okay? And the reason it's high pressure is because that central channel is so narrow. If you imagine squeezing a hose or a tube of toothpaste, that will squirt out the water or the toothpaste, won't it, because of the increased pressure? So that's the same in the artery. We've got this high pressure of blood, okay? And we know that the artery takes the blood away from the heart, okay? That pressured blood gets taken away from the heart. Now, the vein is different because it carries blood in a slightly different circumstance. So therefore, it has thinner walls, okay? Now, note the word thinner, okay? Because the walls actually are still got a bit of thickness about them, but they're just thinner than the artery, okay? So that's important when you're making statements in biology. Be as comparative as you can when you're looking at 2 things, okay? So veins have thinner walls. They have a wider channel, okay? So this channel here is much wider than the one that we saw in the artery. Now, and it carries blood under low pressure back towards the heart, okay? Low pressure because it's wider, okay? The wider the channel, the less pressure the blood will be under. And it carries it into the heart because veins take things in, don't they? So that's towards the heart. Now, veins also contain something called a valve, okay? And we can see a valve here again, very rudimentary effort for me to do a valve, but that's sort of what they look like. And basically, how a valve works is when blood passes through the valve then closes to prevent the backflow of blood, okay? So it has an important job. It prevents backflow of blood because, for example, when blood is returning from your little toes all the way back up to your heart, it's working hard against gravity and the pressure's really low. So you don't want all that blood to be like pooling in the lower extremities of your body. So having these valves mean that once the blood is able to get past a certain point, the valve will shut, which means it will not go the wrong way. Okay, and we also have those valves, as you know, in the heart, which have the same function to prevent the blood from flowing the wrong direction. Okay, it prevents this backflow of blood. Now, the last wee thing we need to know about in this particular topic is about capillaries. Now, capillaries are the 3rd type of blood vessel. And capillaries are interesting because they are super important when it comes to getting the materials into and out of cells. They are thin-walled, okay? That's an important thing to remember, not just about capillaries, but about any surface which is going to be exchanging materials. So capillaries are thin-walled, okay? Really, really thin walls. And what they do is they have a large surface area. They basically wrap themselves around tissues and organs to give a much bigger surface area. Now, we know from earlier on that having a big surface area is good. It's an advantage for a biological system because it allows you to exchange more materials. It allows you to diffuse more materials from the capillaries into our tissues and cells and so on. Okay, and as it says there, it forms networks at the tissues and organs. Okay, that's what we call it. And what that does is allow efficient gas exchange or exchange of other materials between the blood here in this sort of pinkish colour and then the red there into the cells that surround it. Okay, and you can just see how close and how wrapped around those cells the capillaries are. Okay, they are minimizing any possible issues or delays in terms of getting those materials into those cells. Nice thin walls, larger surface area, good blood supply, okay, rich in blood surrounding these tissues and organs, which forms these lovely networks that it mentions there, okay? And we can have a little look at a video here which shows us what capillary looks like in terms of these networks that it forms, okay? You can see our artery there in red, we can see our vein in blue, and you can see the capillary there, okay? Those networks, those channels, those tunnels that form between the artery and the vein. And what they do is they exchange materials like oxygen and glucose and so on with the cells, and they take away the waste materials like carbon dioxide, etc. Okay, we can see that happening there in that image. We can see those networks. We can also see an artery there, which is in a lot of trouble as well, but that's less relevant right now. Okay, folks, I hope that was useful. We're going to do some past paper questions now on this topic, and I'll see you in a sec. Hi, folks. Welcome to part 2. We're going to look at some past paper questions on the topic 2.6, which is transport animals. Okay, let's have a look at this question here, number 12. It says the list below refers to features of the vessels in a capillary network. Which statements refer to features that allow efficient gas exchange? Okay, so we saw from our image of the capillary a few moments ago that they, and from the description as well, that they're extremely thin-walled, aren't they? Okay, so that will allow efficient gas exchange. Did we see that they were in close contact with tissues? We did. They formed networks around the organs and tissues. And were they highly branched? Well, we saw that as well in our little video animation that we watched. Okay, all those different branches that it had. So it's actually going to be all 3 for this one. Okay, next question. The following sequence shows part of the blood flow through the body. Which line in the table identifies X, Y, and Z? Okay, this is very similar to what we were discussing a few moments ago about the kind of question they can ask us in the exam to do with the sequence of blood flow. So we know that the right atrium, okay, of the heart is the first chamber that blood enters. But what's the name of the next chamber that it goes through? Well, if it's the right atrium first, A before V, the next vessel is going to be the right ventricle, sorry. Okay, so we're going to tick the right ventricle there. And then the right ventricle is going to have to send blood out of the heart, okay? And we're going to use a blood vessel to do that. Now, which one of these 2 blood vessels can take blood out of the heart? Artery away, AA, so it's going to be the pulmonary artery. Okay, and how do we know it's pulmonary? Well, the next thing in the sequence is lungs. So pulmonary associated with lungs. And then lastly, what's Z going to be? Well, that's going from the lungs back into the left atrium. So because it's in to the heart and it's coming away from the lungs, that's going to be the pulmonary vein for that one. Okay, so the answer is going to be B in that circumstance. 10 and 11 refer to this heart diagram, that's fine. Which line in the table below correctly identifies the 4 chambers of the heart labelled W, X, Y, and Z? Okay, so W, let's have a look over here. Now, W is on the left side of the heart, but we know that the left is the right, so that's going to be right something. And we know it's the first chamber, okay, it's the upper chamber that blood is going to enter, okay? Therefore, that must be the atrium, A before V. All right, so that's going to be right atrium. Then Y, if that's the right atrium, Y is going to be look at the shape of the vessel, the right ventricle, okay? So Y is going to be the right ventricle. Now, in theory, we've already worked out what our answer is going to be just by identifying those 2, but we'll just be sure about the other ones. So this one over here, we've got vessel W there, vessel X there. Now, that is going to be receiving blood, okay? That's going to be coming in. So if blood is going into it, it must be the atrium. That's the first vessel that it goes into. Okay, so X is going to be an atrium, and it's on the right-hand side as we look at it, and we know the right is the left, so it's going to be the left atrium, okay? So it could technically be either of them. Z is going to be, it's on the same side as X, okay? And it has this shape here, a bit like a V, so that's going to be the left ventricle, okay? We've got 4 ticks for D there, so D must be our right answer. Number 11, which line in the table below correctly identifies the type of blood carried in vessels P and Q and R? So our two options, looking at this table, are deoxygenated and oxygenated. So let's have a look at P, Q, and R. So P is going into the heart, and it's going in through the vessel called the vena cava. Now that brings blood back from the body, so that's going to be deoxygenated. Q, that's our blood vessel that's called the aorta. Now the aorta takes oxygenated blood to the body, so that's going to be oxygenated. And R is our pulmonary vein, that's bringing blood back from the lungs, so that blood is also going to be oxygenated. So Q and R oxygenated, P is going to be deoxygenated, so the answer is going to be this one here, isn't it? Those are the ones that have got all three right there. Let's have a look at question 14 here. Which of the following statements about blood cells is false? Okay, we're looking for a false statement here. So white blood cells are part of the immune system. That's true. Phagocytes are a type of white blood cell. True as well. Red blood cells contain hemoglobin. Also true. Phagocytes transport nutrients around the body. That's the bit that's wrong there, okay? Phagocytes are a type of white blood cells. It says up here, it's the blood which transports nutrients around the body, okay? So that's going to be the one that's false. So therefore, D is going to be our answer. Which row in the table identifies how lymphocytes destroy pathogens? So how do lymphocytes destroy pathogens? Well, lymphocytes can produce antibodies and cannot do phagocytosis. Okay, so no phagocytosis. So therefore the answer has to be A for that one. Okay, phagocytosis is carried out, but remember, by phagocytes, not by lymphocytes. Okay, let's have a look at this section 2 question here then, just for a bit of variety. So this one says, the diagram below shows an external surface view of a human heart. Name the blood vessel O, which carries blood to the lungs. So O is taking blood to the lungs, okay, away from the heart to the lungs. As soon as you see lungs, you should be thinking pulmonary. And because it's taking blood away from the heart to the lungs, AA, artery away. Okay, moving on to part 2. Name artery P, which carries oxygenated blood to the body. So artery P here, it's taking oxygenated blood to the body. Okay, so it's going to the body, not the lungs. So therefore, it can't be one of the pulmonary ones. And if it's taking it blood to the body, it's going away from the heart. So what artery is left that's not the pulmonary artery? It's the aorta. Okay, and the third one, name artery Q, which supplies the heart muscle with oxygen. Those are called the coronary arteries. Okay, so the coronary arteries, they supply the heart with its own supply of blood. So question 9 here, this is a good one to have a look at. This one asks us to look at the different types of blood vessel and to choose one and describe its structure and function. Okay, so I'm just going to pick, arteries just because it's the first one in the list. Okay, now arteries, what do they have? Well, arteries have a thick muscular wall. They have a narrow central channel and they carry blood under high pressure away from the heart. Okay. If you said veins, you'd say thinner walls, wider central channel. You could mention that they contain valves. You could say that they take blood into the heart at lower pressure as well. Okay. And if you said capillaries, we're looking to say that they have thin walls. They form networks at the tissues and organs. They allow exchange of materials. They have a large surface area. Okay, something along those lines would get you the marks, depending on which one you chose. Personally, I would choose the arteries or veins myself, but it's up to you which one you go for in that example. Okay, this is a nice one here to have a wee look at. So this one asks us, lymphocytes and phagocytes are specialised white blood cells. Describe the different ways in which these two types of cell destroy pathogens. Okay, so let's start with lymphocytes then. That was the first one in the question. So lymphocytes produce antibodies, which are specific to a pathogen, and they destroy the pathogen. Okay. Phagocytes, they carry out phagocytosis, okay, where they engulf and digest the pathogens to destroy them. Okay. So the phagocytes engulf and digest the pathogens to destroy them. So that's what they're looking for here. Name the system in the human body which destroys pathogens. Hopefully that's a straightforward one. That's the immune system. And we'll do one more here just at the bottom, or the last two, sorry, here at the bottom. So let's have a look. Compare the structure of these two types of vessels. Okay. Now, when you're doing a comparison question for the vessels, I would always choose arteries and veins. They're the easiest to compare. So you would say arteries have thicker muscular walls, whereas, okay, so it's a comparison question, veins have thinner walls. Okay. You could say arteries have a narrower central channel, whereas veins have a wider central channel. And then lastly, veins have valves, whereas arteries do not. Okay, so that would get you your 3 marks if you mentioned those there. Now, I should say the key thing of this question is it asks us to compare the structure of these two types of vessels. So you would not get marks for mentioning things like transporting blood away from the heart at high pressure for artery and transporting blood into the heart at lower pressure with the vein. Okay, you would not get the marks for those because those are function rather than structure. So remember again, read the question carefully. Is it asking for the structure? That's these things. Is it asking for the function? That's what it does. Okay. What is it doing? Well, it's taking blood away from the heart at high pressure if it's the artery. Okay. And the last one here, hemoglobin is found in red blood cells, state its function. So the function of hemoglobin is to bind to oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. Okay. Hemoglobin. All right. So we bind to oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. Um, it might be tempting just to give the function of red blood cells here, but it's actually wanting the function of hemoglobin specifically for this one. Okay, so that's what your answer is going to be for that one. All right, folks, I hope that's been useful. As always, leave me any comments to let me know if you have found the lesson useful or if there's anything else you want to ask about that hasn't been covered. But until the next lesson, that's all for now. Class dismissed.